reading The French New Wave in Artistic School by Michel Marie and Richard J. Neupert. Malden, Massachusetts, Blackwell Publishing, 2003. Introduction. The French Nouvelle Vague again! Exclamation point. The Nouvelle Vague, or New Wave, is certainly one of the most famous cinematic movements in film history. Scholars continually refer to it with either nostalgia or some suspicion. As early as 1959, the uncle in Zazie dans le Metro, Zazie in the Metro, Malais, looked about in the middle of a traffic jam in Paris and screamed out ironically, quote, "This is the new wave!" Exclamation point, end quote. But what finally is the new wave? Question mark. Beyond the mythical, quote, circle of friends, end quote, the famed band of Cahiers du Cinema critic filmmakers led by Francois Truffaut, that virulent young critic who attacked and destroyed all the most respected and prestigious French film productions in his columns for Arts magazine, where or was there any real aesthetic coherence to the new wave? Question mark. Was it simply a phenomenon of renewal thanks to the arrival of a new generation, an event that arrives every 20 years anyway? Question mark. Did it have disastrous effects by glorifying amateurish techniques and a cult of improvisation at the expense of solid scripts, basing a film's quality on perceptions of a few directors and critics? Question mark. Did it chase average spectators from the theaters? Question mark. Is it not true that these films appeared at the very moment when the curve for movie attendance began its dizzying descent, which cut audiences in half? Question mark. Finally, why has this myth survived for so long since the 1960s? Question mark. And why did Jean-Luc Godard use this famous expression, quote, La Nouvelle Vague, end quote, as the name of his 1990 film, featuring the popular actor Alain Delon 30 years after his own, quote, Nouvelle Vague, end quote, Trump About du Souffle, Breathless 1960, question mark. Nearly every year, on the occasion of some film festival or in the summary of the year's trends in film production, chroniclers ask whether there are any signs of another, quote, new wave, end quote, on the horizon. Whenever two young directors display some evidence of complicity, someone sees in them the potential nucleus of a group that will create a movement of thematic or aesthetic renewal along the model established by this mythical and now distant new wave. In nature, the movement of waves may repeat endlessly with the rhythm of the seas, but in French cinema, the wave of the 1959 or the wave of 1959 remains unique. It is that singularity which this book strives to demonstrate by providing some answers to the questions posed above. The new wave is indeed a victim of its own fame, and yet it is difficult to cite a single work within the last 20 years that carefully analyzes this phenomenon. James Monaco's The New Wave, published in 1976, has been out of print for years and was more of an auteurist summary than an historical investigation. Jean-Luc Douin edited a book in 1983, La Nouvelle Vague, 25 ans après, the New Wave 25 years later, which offered a number of observations and picturesque reflections, but it is a study that remains very limited. In short, most beginning film students and film buffs believe they already know everything about the movement, but this knowledge is often limited to several common sources or short summaries and survey histories that do not always stand up to the test of historical evaluation. My hypothesis will be the following. The French New Wave was a coherent movement which existed for a limited period of time and whose emergence was favored by a series of simultaneous factors intervening at the close of the 1950s and especially during 1958 through 1959. I will describe these various factors in the first three chapters. I will also propose a fairly strict definition of the concept of a school in film history. The New Waves was, first of all, a journalistic slogan connected with a critical movement, that of the, quote, Hitchcocko-Hawksians, end quote, as they were rather ironically labeled by film critic and theorist Andre Bazin, co-founder of Cahiers du Cinema. I will privilege here, however, an analysis organized around the economic and technical trends surrounding the appearance of these films, giving comparatively less attention to thematic and stylistic factors. This focus of inquiry fits recent tendencies in cinema history, which strive to give a privileged place to economic and technical mechanisms in order to anchor more fully aesthetic observations in their generating conditions, which include the production and distribution of films, their commercial fate, and also the political and cultural context of this era in France. I have included a chronology I have included a chronology of major political and cultural events in the appendix to help give a concise overview of the era. This book does not offer detailed analyses of individual films. Rather, it makes every effort to present a global synthesis of a movement distinguished by both strengths and weaknesses. Readers of this book could obviously benefit from seeing or re-seeing key films cited here, as well as consultation of critical studies of particular films. For instance, recent studies by Anne Gillane, Carol Lebert, Jean-Louis Latrotte, and myself devoted to La 400 Coups, The 400 Blows, Truffaut, 1959, Jules and Jim, Truffaut, 1961, Hiroshima, Mon Amour, Hiroshima, My Love, Renee, 1959, and La or Les Mépris, Contempt, Godard, 1963, as well as Michel Seytat on Pierre Le Fou, Godard, 1965, Dudley Andrew on Breathless, and Barthélemy Amingoual on Band Apart, Band of Outsiders, 1964, are all very useful. For a larger overview of the historical period, one could consult the following books. In French, René Prédal's Cinq ans de cinéma français is a helpful encyclopedic text that should be useful for young cinephiles today, while Jacques Cecilier's Synthetic Le Cinéma Français, volumes 1 and 2, or Jean-Michel Fredon's L'Age Moderne du Cinéma Français are equally important. In English, general sources include Alan Williams's Republic of Images, Susan Haywood's French National Cinema, and the reference book, The Companion to French Cinema by Jeanette Vincendo. Many of these books cover the lively period from the French Liberation to the New Wave and beyond. Michel Marie would like to thank the following for their useful readings and critical inspired comments. Michel Marie would like to thank the following for their careful readings and critically inspired comments: Jacques Amant, Michel Chion, Claire Hanat, Amandine Moulet, Frédéric Marot, Catherine Shapira, Maxine Cheyenne Fagel, Genevieve Cellier, and Francis Vinoy. He especially thanks Francois Juhel for her patience. Richard Neupert is indebted to Michel Marie for the opportunity to translate La Nouvelle Vague. Michel has been a terrific and inspiring teacher as well. Jane Fargnoli, Sarah Dancy, and the editorial staff at Blackwell Publishers have been delightful to work with and truly dedicated to getting this translation published. Finally, the other person who has been most essential for the English language version of the French New Wave in artistic school is Catherine M. Jones. Her constant and valuable assistance enriched the translation and made it proceed quickly, smoothly, and correctly. She should really be listed as a co-translator. And I was reading the Introduction to the French New Wave in Artistic School by Richard J. Neupert and Michel Marie, Blackwell Publishers, 2003.